Hey everybody, welcome to the latest video. This is an exciting one. Games Workshop very kindly sent me the new Horus Ascended resin model from Forge World. Absolutely gorgeous model. He's not my favourite Primarch, but he's the Primarch that starts everything all off. And getting a new model, I mean the model is absolutely storming, it's amazing, really nice. I'll have a quick look at all the parts here. Yeah, the base is probably a little bit OTT. We'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, the cast itself is really nice. Nice cast. The mould is very good. There's a little bit of flash on the mace, which took a bit of cleaning up, and also some parts on the wolf. It's not uncommon to have little bits of flash like that, but the flash is so thin, it pretty much just falls off if you show it a bit of a blade, so it's not too bad at all. In terms of building it, the hardest part, I mean there are some very flimsy, very small parts, like the little dangling parts off his shoulder pad, which you can just see hanging off on the front. The wolf pelt itself is probably the most challenging part. I did have to grind away a little bit on the inside just to make it fit a bit better. I could have heated him with a bit of a hairdryer or a heat gun, heated the wolf just to make it fit. You can see there's quite a gap underneath the wolf there, so the wolf doesn't fit too well. You can, like I say, you can kind of grind off some of the areas on the underside. I've got a dental burr which I throw in like a little mini drill, mini craft drill, so that helped a little bit. But everything else does go together quite well. You will notice that the claws on the talon of Horus don't quite look the same as the box art. That's because I trimmed away, when I was cutting them off the sprue, I trimmed away a little bit too much of the knuckles. So yeah, it still goes on fine. They still went on to fine, but the fingers themselves are just a little bit short. So just be careful when you're trimming the talons off the sprue. Don't do what I did and trim off too much. Bases, I kind of like the big base, and I kind of don't like the big base. Like display wise, it's like you can't fault the fact that it's really quite cool, like a big pile of skulls. Narrative wise, like has he really found loads of skeletons and piled them up so that he can stand there? Like I'm not entirely sure on the base. I do, however, like the little base. The little base is really quite smart, and he does get glued on the little base once we've done quite a bit of the armour, because the wolf is quite difficult to paint without having something to hold on the bottom of the base. So in terms of bases, I'm always glad when they do these little display bases which lock in, or sorry, the little playing bases which then lock in to a larger display base. It is very cool, which is good. And I like the smaller one. Anyway, on to the painting. So I thought I would very quickly, because it's a large cloak, we can do some really quick airbrush blends on the cloak before we paint everything else. If we do it before we paint the armour, then we don't have to worry about overspray or anything like that. This is Games Workshop do some really nice reds. This is a newer red. It's Gal Vorbak red, which is quite simply the red that I always used to mix as the first base tone for red, which is Mephiston red with a little bit of black, and it is that exact tone, which is great. If you thin it down plenty and work up very slowly like this, very thin layers, then you can get a good dark transition, a good dark starting point to then build up upon. So when you're airbrushing like that, yeah, nice and thin. Don't overspray it. Don't overspray it. So you put a layer on nice and slowly. Move on to the next fold and let it dry before you go back to it. Don't over wet it. Don't overpaint it. And then the next layer of paint, which is the Mephiston red, and you'll see that I'm following the creases here as much as I can. So following the lines, exactly the same as you would paint this with a brush. Nice big brush, and just follow the lines of the creases. and that will give you a nice realistic or a good base for the highlights. This top corner is going to be a little bit brighter. It's going to be the corner of the cloak that you can see when he's standing and you're looking at it from the front, so try to make that one a little bit brighter. And in terms of where to highlight, it's every surface of the cloak which is facing upwards. Try to get a little bit of a highlight on that. So even the bottom of the creases, when you're working on the top side, even the bottom of the creases, they are facing upwards, so you can catch those and just give them a little bit more red as well. Now, in terms of the colour, I thought I would try, like everybody's going to paint Horus black, so I thought I'd try and shift it a little bit further away. This is quite cool. So these are all my paints tend to get repotted into these very cool, very old school Games Workshop paint pots. So I do have them on my website. So I repot them all into there. So we are going with Sons of Horus style green. I'm going to try and do the entire armour in Sons of Horus green. Just because, honestly, it's just because I like to be my own special little snowflake and try and be different. And everybody's going to paint in black, so I thought I'd try and make him look slightly different. I couldn't find anything in the lore that said that he always has black armor. Like, as far as I know, his armor gets slowly swapped out with black as he kind of goes through the heresy. So I don't know. Maybe he's just not quite replaced all his armor yet. Anyway, we've got, so there's three paints. There's three very easy paints which we're going to mix up different layers on this. So we have Lupercal green, which is this paint here. It's quite nice. It's very translucent, which is perfect actually for what we're going to be doing. Then there's Sons of Horus green, and then Celestra grey. So we have, I think I build up five transitions for this. So I have the Lupercal green, which is just watered down 50-50, maybe a touch more, maybe 60-40 water to paint. And then there's Sons of Horus green is the next step, and then Sons of Horus green with a tiny little bit of Celestra grey, maybe 70% Sons of Horus and 30% Celestra, and then the opposite, so 70% Celestra and a little bit of Horus, Sons of Horus green, and then pure Celestra as a final very small highlight. Now, what we're doing is we're trying to build up light volumes, but I like painting like this in terms of it gives texture and interest to each panel. You'll see Rich Grey do this a lot as well. So you're working up light volumes in a textured kind of way. So the Lupercal green is being kind of scrubbed on a little bit. It's nice and thin, so it's drying sort of patchy, and because we're scrubbing it on as well, those scrub marks affect how it dries as well, so you end up with little marks which you can then follow very carefully with subsequent highlights. And if there are any marks in the scratches from earlier layers of paint, you can then highlight those and make something really interesting on the armor. Now, one of the things that you have to do when you're doing this is, as you get higher up the highlights, you have to start using less paint on your brush. Now, the shoulder pad here, you'll find that I don't really like it. I had too much paint on my paintbrush when I was doing one of the highlights, and the highlight point, the highlight volume on the shoulder pad gets too large. So you have to try to keep the paintbrush very small marks. See there, that blob there, there's just too much of a highlight there now. So that was that's the penultimate highlight there. That's Celestra grey with a tiny bit of Sons of Horus green in it, and it's just too much. So don't make that mistake. Don't over highlight. It's actually a little bit better when we're doing the thigh later on. The thigh, when we're getting the the details and the scratches on the thigh, it works a little bit smarter. But the highlight placements, it's probably a little bit from my photography days. I always tend to paint and highlight as if the light is coming down from camera right, so as if there's a big sun on the right hand side of the screen and it's lighting everything up there. Now I do have excuse me, I've got hiccups. I do have a light panel, I do have my light source when I'm painting on the right hand side, so if you look very carefully and just be aware of where the highlights are landing. Now when you're using wet paint as well, you can really see where the highlights are landing and you'll get very high contrast marks. So you can see on the shoulder pad there's a nice highlight line running across the centre, which is much smaller than the highlight line which I've put on there. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. I mean, the scale is always something to be careful of, the scale of the highlights, because we are painting something that's very small, which is supposed to be something that's very large. So you've got to account for that and make the highlights suitably the right size. But on the flip side to that, rule of cool and artistic license. Like if something is going to look cool if you highlight it, or it's going to look better if you highlight it there, then do that. Now there's an awful lot of trim on the model. It does get quite tricky to start highlighting and finding the areas. One thing I would suggest is making sure that you do have very little paint on your brush. So I mean, this is so I really like using DaVinci brushes. This is a DaVinci size. I mean, there's so much paint on that highlight. Look at the mess of that. So that's kind of what I mean with the blob. Like that has now lost all the texture underneath it, and I'm desperately trying to kind of remove it all and get the texture back. So this is a DaVinci brush. I love my DaVinci brushes. I could geek out about DaVinci brushes and why I like them for hours. But this is a size 0. But you'll notice that half of the bristles seem to be coming out of only half the ferrule. So this is a DaVinci size 0, which I've cut half the bristles off, which is lovely. It gives a really nice long straight tip. It's really good for little detail scratches like this. Now this is probably the best example of how to paint this sort of scratchy, high contrast battered armour. This thigh plate comes out really well. So you'll look, we've got the Lupercal green down there already, so we've already got the base tone. Everything is covered with this Lupercal green, even into the shadows. And we build up and then we move around the paint, keeping the Lupercal green in very small little areas to keep the contrast on. So you can see there we've got a blob in the center which is a highlight, and then the Lupercal green around it, so it looks like it's got a bit of battle damage. Like it looks like a bullet has hit that piece of armor and just dinted it, and playing with some shadows. So again, we've got a little bit of paint, and we're going to push that around, and we're going to follow all the little accidental marks that we've been placing in as we've been building it up. Again, this is light on the camera right, so this side of the thigh needs to be slightly brighter than the other side of the thigh, but that doesn't mean how I did it with the shoulder pad. It doesn't mean you put a big blob there and smush it all around. Like, these are very small marks, and they're just traveling further around the thigh plate, and then obviously you have that top thigh plate there, which is just going to get Celestra grey, and it's just going to get marked in. So yeah, there's just to make the armor panel brighter, you put more of the little tiny squiggles with a lighter paint. You don't put a bigger area, so you don't kind of put more space in there. That's a different kind of painting style on large light volume sort of thing. So this is a different. This is very particular on keeping the texture there. and then the same underneath here. So we're trying to just build up the so we've got a blob on there, remove the excess paint, and then we're just going to spread the edges and just move that paint around on the layer, creating interesting scratches and things. I'm very, very sorry, by the way, that it's slightly out of focus. Hopefully you'll be all right and you can follow along. Yeah, it's just very, very tiny marks. I can't stress enough that you don't have very much paint on your brush. And the other tip actually is move your brush when you're putting paint on a model. Be very deliberate with your movements. Like I've been doing these little squiggles a long time, so it looks like I'm moving the brush quite quickly. If you can slow down your movement on the brush, just like 20% slower than you think you need to go, and then you'll find yourself making better marks and then speeding up without realizing it. So don't try to, even though these look very, very random marks, don't try to just scribble randomly. Be very particular where you're placing these marks, following lines of, again, we're just following those little lines of accidental drying of how the paint is drying on the Armour panel to keep the highlights looking interesting. So camera right again, so the light is coming from the right hand side of this model, and because this is on the thigh, the light isn't going to wrap around too much, so it's going to be a little bit darker. So we're just doing less bright squiggles on this side compared to the other side. So the right hand side of that thigh plate is going to be brighter just by virtue of there being more squiggles with the Celestra grey sort of thing. It's a great way of explaining highlights. There's this armour plate is lighter because there's more squiggles on it. But it is true. That is literally why that side of the armour plate, the right hand side of the armour plate, is lighter. So that's how and just kind of rinse and repeat all this all the way across the armour. It doesn't take that long. You'd be surprised actually. Even though it's very, very trim heavy, the model, it doesn't really take that long to paint. It's a very odd one, particularly when you're painting in this kind of style. I suppose you could speed it up by keeping it smooth, but if you do like this little texture as well, you can lessen it back a little bit. Once you've done it, you can kind of glaze over it with a little bit of probably Lupercal green and just soften it back down again. Right, anyway, so we're on to the trim. Trim is going to be true metallic metals, so we're going to be using metallic paints on this. I do tend to paint my metallic metals when I'm doing true metallic in a little bit of a non-metallic style, if you like. And one of the ways that you can control how metallic paints look is by controlling the level of gloss on the surface, and one of the ways of doing this is by using just a regular paint as a base paint. So this is Rhinox hide. It's just fast forwarded. You don't need to see me painting all the trim in real time, and that takes away the gloss level in the shadows. So now the shadows are very matte. They're a nice matte finish, so they're not competing with the gloss of the metallic paint. And the metallic paint that we're going to use is Scale Colour Victorian Brass. So we're going to mix it 50-50 with the Rhinox hide. So I've got two highlights here. I've got 50-50 Rhinox hide and Victorian Brass, which is this here. You can see it's quite dull, and we're going to put this over the vast majority of the trim. We're going to leave some shadows in the recesses, which will just be Rhinox hide, and then we'll highlight up once more with just Victorian Brass. Now you can leave it at just that. We are going to put some more highlights on later in one of the later videos, and I would recommend adding at least these extra highlights on in certain areas. You don't have to do it everywhere, but it just kind of pops it a little bit further. But we're going to run around and just make sure that the vast majority of the trim here is being caught with this 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and Victorian brass. Now this is a knackered brush as well, so just be very, very light with your touches. You can't get metallic paint in the recess on the Armour if you don't press too hard, sort of thing. So as long as you're being light, then you'll always just catch the highest surfaces. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a line of light. Again, the light is going to be coming from the right hand side, so if you look and pay attention to where the light from the lamp is landing, particularly in this kind of little position here, so the light is landing there where I've just put that final highlight. So that highlight there is the pure Victorian brass. So that highlight, we're going to follow that highlight line all the way down the body. A tiny little bit of a secondary bounce highlight on the other side, but the main highlight on the gold is going to be what side is it? It's like 2 o'clock on the model, all the way down. So it's going to run all the way down that side of the model, that face of the model. Anything that's gold that is under that line, we're going to put a highlight of Victorian brass, and then when we get further with the highlights, we're going to use a brighter gold and then also a silver. The highlight sizes are just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as we go down. So we've done the collar, and then everything that's in that vertical line underneath the collar is also going to get caught by this gold, and we're going to end up with a very directional, a very strong highlight for the gold and the trim, which allows you to see where the light is coming from, sort of thing. So you end up with a very, very good dramatic lighting that follows the lighting of the Armour and the gold trim, which is great. It's exactly what we want. And none more so than if you look at the thigh now, you can see on the Rhinox hide, you can see where the highlight needs to be when we're highlighting the gold. So on the Rhinox hide, you can see a slight highlight just on the inside of that thigh, and then the opposite side of the thigh is darker, but that highlight on the thigh runs, it's the same position all the way down the leg. So when we get to it, we're going to do that same highlight position all the way down the leg. It's just on the right hand side of the thigh, and then it's the right hand side of the kneecap, right hand side of the shin pad, and all running down there. I'm completely out of focus on this. I'm very, very sorry. It is an art making sure that you're painting always in focus. Like if you move just a couple of millimeters, you've lost focus on these little cameras when you zoomed in this much. But focus will come back anyway. So now onto the thigh. Oh no, we're just still doing the Little Sons of Horus eye. And I forgot actually. I was trying to remember when we get round to painting those. I was trying to remember which way round the highlights were, which way around the colours are on the Sons of Horus eye. Hopefully I get them the right way. But there's the line I just showed you very, very quickly there. The line that's running all the way down the front of the torso, down there like that. So anything underneath that line, I'm just going to catch a little bit of a highlight on. You can see we've not been painting that long really, and we've already got a lot of the Armour panels done, a lot of the trim done. It does get painted quite quickly when you're painting in this sort of messy, sketchy style, and it is really, really good fun as well. So this is where I'm talking about with the right hand side of the leg and the thigh. So we've got the shin pad there, the thigh plate trim, the shin pad, the knee pad, everything's on the right hand side, making sure we're getting all that covered, and then we can leave a little bit in the recess, which is the Rhinox hide. And then the same here, look, so that's the pure Victorian brass, tiny smaller highlight running all the way down that very, very small line. And again, there really isn't a lot of paint on my brush. You can almost say it's a little bit of like a dry brushy style. And then it's just a small little bounce highlight on the left hand side. You can see how little effort I put on the left hand side of the thigh there. The left hand side of the thigh being much darker, so it doesn't need as much of a highlight. It's much more kind of bounce highlighty. Anyway, so that is the end of part 1. When we come back, we're going to be doing some OSL for the head. We've got some the mace to do. We've got all the little bits of the skulls and the heads, and obviously the claw and the wolf as well. So I hope you enjoyed watching that. Please come back for part 2. Drop me a like. Please share, subscribe, and drop a comment down below on whether you're going to get this model as well. I'd love to see all the models, all the versions that you are painting. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram. You can just search for Chris Frost, and I'm the easiest person to find on the internet. Yeah, come and hang out in Twitch, say hello, and I'll be painting a little bit more on of Horus on Twitch as well. So thanks very much, everybody, and I will see you all at the next video. Take care. Bye bye.